Now, not everyone's like Super Jimtendo and hates pickup videos. Some of you out there, especially you, absolutely adore them. So if you want to see what my last pickups of 2022 are, you just wait until after these. So hello friends and welcome back to Generation Pixel, just in time for the last pickups of 2022. Now before I get cracking with the actual pickups, there are a couple of announcements I would like to make. Firstly, YouTuber of the Month. Of course the contest will be rolling on to a new year soon. It won't be 2022 anymore. We'll be moving into 2023 and a whole new host. And if you haven't voted for your YouTuber of the Year 2022, the link will be in the description. It's quite simply down to 8-bit Rach from the UK versus the real Bit Wars from the USA. It's your decision, and of course the link's in the description if you want to check them out and go and vote for one of them. That brings me on to the second part, which is the Pixel years. I know a few of you out there have been waiting quite patiently for 1991 to come rolling around, and it will be on its way. Now that the YouTuber of the Month is almost wrapped up for me, I'll have plenty more time to delve into the past and share with you my experience of those years. But that's the announcements over, and it's time to have a look at the pickups I've made over the last, well, let's say couple of months now, and the last pickups I will be making for myself anyway in 2022. Of course, as always, I will be running from the most current generation and going backwards to that juicy retro at the end. So wherever you want to be, then you just skip down below. If you want to see the new stuff, it'll be coming straight up. And this time, I'm going to try and speedrun it, because there is a lot to get through. And the first one, well, that's Horizon Forbidden West. Now this, without a doubt, hands down is probably the best sequel I've ever played. And not just because of the graphical improvements and not just the gameplay improvements, but the story. I have played a lot of sequels over the years, but the story in this one just comes together so perfectly. Now I know what you're saying, Horizon Forbidden West, you've already played that, should be in your collection. Well, I had to borrow it back at launch because it launched in February. And thanks to Scott and Jen over at Retro Rivals, I didn't get the opportunity to buy it. But I did have to play it. So if you want to know why I'm just buying it now, it's because of those two. And despite no fun February putting a scupper on me buying this game when it launched, it is still without a doubt one of the must buys of this year. So Horizon Forbidden West coming into the collection. And next up, The Quarry, another game from Supermassive, and yes, it's up there with Until Dawn. It might not have the same impact as Until Dawn because we have seen a lot of this before, it's not quite as new, fresh and trendy, but when it comes to putting out quality games, then Supermassive haven't let me down. And if anything, with The Quarry, it seems like they've been able to step back up a gear after a slightly dip in form when it came to the game Little Hope. I do, however, have a lot of faith in this development team, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming next, which just so happens to be The Devil in Me. Now, I can't really speak about this game because I haven't played it yet. It's one of my most recent acquisitions, but it is one of the Dark Pictures anthology, and it's there with Supermassive and Bandai Namco, so really happy to get The Devil in Me into the collection quite quickly, well, quickly for me anyway, and no doubt I'll get my teeth stuck into it over this festive period. And next up, we have Judgment, a game in the Yakuza series. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail. One, I can't go into detail about the game because I haven't played it yet. And two, I'm not going to go into details as why I'm so excited to play this game, because there's something else coming up in this video that will explain that fully. Just rest assured that I am absolutely ecstatic to have Judgment in the collection, and finally getting around to playing this game, and of course its sequel, is very high on my to-do list for 2023. Leaving us at a good spot to segue into the next generation, and that's PlayStation 4, starting with Shantae Half Genie Hero. Now, to be frankly honest, this is not my cup of tea when it comes to gaming, not these days anyway. But this Ultimate Edition came my way for a very reasonable price and I just couldn't not pick it up. Now, it's not that I don't play retro games and it's not that I don't play modern retro games. They just don't happen to be my flavour of the month at this particular point in my gaming life. Now, at the time of picking up Shantae Half Genie Hero, I did put out a short video listing what was in the box, so if you want to have a look at that, I'll put the link to that in the description too. But it will be my better half who will get around to playing this game long before I ever slip it into my PlayStation 4. Again, not saying that I won't play this game, it's not just going to gather dust. I will get round to it, but other than someone putting a challenge out there for me to get round to playing this game, or me just changing my current taste in gaming, then I'm much more likely to be watching this game be played than play it myself. But I'm still more than happy to have Shantae Half Genie Hero in the collection. And next up, World of Final Fantasy. Now, those who know you don't need to ask me why, because it's Final Fantasy, as simple as that. Because for me, Sony and Final Fantasy are an absolute match made in heaven, and whenever there's a Sony release of any Final Fantasy game, well, that's the one I'm going to want in the collection. Although, if there's ever a Final Fantasy game released, then I want that in the collection too. It's as simple as that. But let's move away from Final Fantasy onto the next game. Kingdom Hearts 1.5 and 2.5 on the PlayStation 4, and yes, I do see there is a sort of Final Fantasy link there too. But the main reason that I picked up this particular version was just for ease of play. I do have Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 on the PlayStation 2, but they're both still sitting on the backlog, and I just thought this would be the best way to play it. Now, if you don't think that and think that the PlayStation 2 version is where I should start, then drop that down in the comments, because it will be a little while before I get around to this. But if I don't hear from you, it will be the PlayStation 4 ports that I will be playing. And next up, Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, the HD remaster. Now, like with a lot of the games I pick up, these are games that I've never played before, but back in early 2021 I absolutely fell in love with Persona 5, and ever since I've been looking into getting more games from that universe to stick my JRPG teeth into and get a good bite off of them. Now, I do remember playing a little bit of Persona back in the PlayStation days, that's the PlayStation 1, but it didn't quite capture my attention back then, so I've decided to roll the dice with this HD remaster of 3 just to see how good the series might be moving forward. And who knows, I might even get back to the original PlayStation versions. Which leads us on to Valkyria Chronicles 4. Now, the Valkyria Chronicles is something that I've been introduced to just this year, when a recommendation to play this game came via another YouTube content creator in the form of Valkyria Chronicles Remaster, and after playing that absolutely stunning game, I had no choice but to pick up as many of the Valkyria Chronicle games that came my way, Valkyria Chronicles 4 being the first of that, and it was followed almost in a blink of an eye with Valkyria Revolution, one of those rare occurrences where two games that you're after pop up straight away, one after the other. So these Valkyria Chronicles are good examples of why pickups videos cost you money, especially if you watch someone with a reputation of Tom at Sega Head. But as costly as video game collecting can be, you do get a nice buzz when you find a couple of games almost back to back that you're truly really after. And moving on, we have Yakuza Kiwami, and then Yakuza Kiwami 2, the Yakuza Remaster Collection, which has 3, 4 and 5, and Yakuza 6. Oh, not to mention that Yakuza 0 is winging its way to me as we speak. And if you want to see me wax lyrical a little bit more about Kiryu and the Yakuza series, then you pop over to Geordie Slasher Gaming and watch his 52 game challenge video, which, yes, yours truly features in. Because at the end of November I decided to play Yakuza 0 for the very first time, and I think it's fairly safe to say that it absolutely captured my imagination, so much so that I only have Yakuza 6 to go before I finish the mainline Yakuza games. So now you know why I was so happy to get Judgment on the PlayStation 5, because this truly is a series that I have fallen in love with, and dare I say, this might be my favourite overall video game series of all time. Well, at the moment anyway. Now let's switch things up and do that quite literally, and we'll move on to the Switch games that I picked up. Didn't pick up a lot of Switch games because I don't tend to show it the love that it deserves, but every now and again I will get myself a lovely little Switch title. And the first one, well, it's Klonoa. When it comes to collecting for the Switch, I have a very primary and very selective goal, and that tends to be to pick up HD remasters. As much as the PlayStation 5 is my main daily driver when it comes to playing video games, the portability of the Switch combined with the absolutely fantastic list of titles when it comes to HD remasters from retro games is where this machine absolutely shines for me. Now, back in the day I played neither of the Klonoa games, but now I can, and from the comfort of my sofa, from my bedroom, from my workplace, or even on the train to work. So this Klonoa remaster was an absolute no-brainer. Yes, I had to pick it up, happy to have it in the collection, and looking forward to experiencing these games for the very first time. And next up for the Switch, get ready for a very big surprise, because it is, of course it is, it's Final Fantasy VII, but also Final Fantasy VIII, which is a bit of a shame because we all know my feelings on that particular instalment in the series. And yes, I do have the original Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII games. Yes, I do have digital downloads of Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII on the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5. And yes, I even have this remaster of Final Fantasy VIII for the PlayStation 4. But it's like I said, if it's a Final Fantasy game or a Final Fantasy port, or even remaster or whatever, if that Final Fantasy name is tagged onto the game, then I'm going to want it into the collection. Judge me if you will, and drop that down in the comments if you will. But surely we're all allowed that one little slice of the geek kingdom that we just can't get enough of. And that for me is Final Fantasy, so having Final Fantasy 7 and 8 on a Switch cartridge, well, I just had to do it. Now let's stay with Nintendo and move on to the Nintendo Wii. It's not a system I collect greatly for, but you know what, there's a few titles out there that even I must have. And the first one that I picked up, Ninja Bread Man. Now okay, this one deserves an explanation because there's no Final Fantasy license, there's no JRPG justification, and there's certainly no nostalgia behind it. Well, actually there might be a little bit of nostalgia behind it, because although you're looking at a game here called Ninja Bread Man, which is a truly awful game for the Nintendo Wii, this particular game started its life as Zool 3. Now for anyone out there that doesn't know what Zool is, Zool was a 2D platformer from the 16-bit era, highly popular on the Commodore Amiga and even the Sega Megadrive. So the fascination for Gingerbread Man for me, and why I needed to get it into the collection, was purely down to the fact that its history and roots are deeply embedded in Zool. Now I'm not saying that you should go out and buy Gingerbread Man because of that, I'm absolutely not saying that, but for me I just had to do it, so Gingerbread Man in the collection for better or worse. Which leads us nicely onto the next game. And of course it's another Final Fantasy game, and this time it's Final Fantasy The Crystal Bearers. Now I'm going to throw my hands up here and say I have very little experience when it comes to Final Fantasy games on Nintendo consoles. Yes, I have messed about with the earlier Final Fantasy games, but only ever on a PlayStation. But Gordon over at Gib84 has assured me that this is an absolute banger and one that I must play. And just because I like a bit of symmetry even when it comes to my pickups, I also got this. Final Fantasy Echoes of Time, and it's another Crystal Chronicles title. As with the last one, I have no idea about this one at all. All I really know is it's got that Final Fantasy label on it. And of course, just to be honest with you one more time, if it's got Final Fantasy printed on it, I will buy it. Seriously people, they're Final Fantasy games. Of course I was going to buy them. I was going to buy them if they ran on a potato. But the Echoes of Time is in the collection now, and I will get round to giving this a go at some point. If the Crystal Chronicles are something that you are aware of, then feel free to drop that down in the comments. Let me know what you thought of them. But regardless, it's a Final Fantasy game and it's staying in the collection. So let's move away from Nintendo cul-de-sac and onto Sony Street. That's where I prefer to live anyway. And the PSP. Now I only did pick up one game for the PSP, but that game is Breath of Fire 3. Now I don't often double dip on games, but when I do make the exception, it tends to be for JRPGs, and JRPGs with stories and characters that I absolutely adore. And Breath of Fire 3 is certainly one of those games that is right up there, almost next to Suikoden 2 and Final Fantasy VII. And actually I could go as far as saying that it's neck and neck with Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch. And let me tell you, that's high praise indeed coming from me, because this is one of those rare JRPGs that not only has great characters, great story, but also great combat mechanics, and was possibly the first time that I'd ever seen the combination of magic attacks. So if you are a fan of JRPGs and you haven't played Breath of Fire 3, well, this is a must play game, and the PSP port is coming into the collection to sit beside the original PlayStation version. Staying of course with Sony, it's time to move on to the PlayStation 3 pickups, and this is where Josh at Drinking Games with Josh will be getting his notepad out and writing down anything that he hasn't got yet, because it's one of the systems he truly adores. And the first game that I'm going to show you, Nier. Now for the PlayStation 3 pickups, I'm trying to mainly stick to games that I have no experience of, games I didn't have back in the day, games that I haven't played. And Nier definitely falls into that category. It does have great word of mouth and I'm looking forward to playing it, but I'm relying on you down in the comments to let me know how soon that should be. And as I'm trying to speedrun this pickups video, the next game is South Park: The Stick of Truth. And yes, I have played this game, but just recently I played it at the beginning of the year and it took me utterly by surprise. Seriously, hand on heart, if you love JRPGs, if you love South Park, if you love any combination of those two things, you need to get this played if you have been sleeping on it. It's as simple as that. Because to me it was looking like we were at a place in gaming where turn-based combat was something of the past. The Stick of Truth, however, brings it back in all its splendid glory, and I am so happy that it's in the collection now. And next up is 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand, and quite simply because I needed this to complete my 50 Cent subset, I have both the games now, plus this is a THQ game, and when the toy headquarters stamp their seal of approval on a game, I've usually got no issues with that. Next up is Genji Day of the Blade, and quite simply because this is an early PlayStation 3 game, and for some reason that will become apparent a little bit later in the video, you will see why I've started to get the bug for not only early PlayStation 3 games, but for any games that could be considered launch titles on any of the systems that I collect for. And again with this one, if you think I should be playing this one sooner rather than later, then drop that down in the comments. But next up is the classic HD remasters of Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. Now I have played Shadow of the Colossus and I absolutely love that game. Ico on the other hand, completely new to me, and it does look like the type of game that I would thoroughly enjoy, so let me know down in the comments again, should I be playing Ico sooner or later. But next up is Enchanted Arms, a JRPG published by Ubisoft, but with a very special development team indeed behind it. And I've had the opportunity to put a couple of hours into this game and it didn't disappoint. For some reasons back in the day it flew completely under my radar, but after discovering who developed it, I'm so glad that I managed to pick this one up. And let's be fair, I mainly picked this one up here to prove to Mark at Geordie Slasher Gaming and Tommy at Dad and Lads Gaming that yes, I can play a From Software game. As it's not only a great game in itself, but it's also a piece of history showing that From Software could do much more than just Souls games. So happy to have Enchanted Arms into the collection. And next up is Driver San Francisco, and not just because it's part of the Driver series, which is a fairly important series when it comes to PlayStation, but I did have the privilege of watching my son play this a couple of years ago, and I was absolutely fascinated by the mechanics in the game, mainly the mechanic where you seem to be some sort of ghost or spirit, and you can possess any driver out there in the road jumping from car to car. Fascinating concept and one I'm looking to delve into. So Driver San Francisco, definitely happy to have that into the collection. But next up is Wanted Weapons of Fate, and absolutely no explanation needed here because this is a licensed game. Now it might be a bad licensed game, it might be a good licensed game, I don't know because I haven't tried it yet. I do know the lads over at 3 Drinks In have played this, and from what I saw from their gameplay, it was on that sort of edge between bad and good. Of course, Chris and Keith over there make any game look hysterical anyway. But back to the game, it's licensed from a film that I absolutely adore, and I'm hoping the game lives up to either in terms of greatness or absolutely shockingly badness. And that's Wanted Weapons of Fate into the collection. And up next is Disgaea Absence of Justice, and it's another game that I haven't played. I have dabbled with the earlier games, and I do like a good strategy RPG. The first game in the series on the PlayStation 2 is already up in the collection, and this is number 3. Yup, it's another subset in the building, but I'm getting there. Which means I do have to locate the other games in the series before I'll be truly happy. But Disgaea 3 is here and safely tucked away, so ready to move on to the next one, and the next game is Falling Skies the game, and yes, it's another licensed game, and I'm really hoping it's going to be another bad licensed game. I know it might sound crazy to you, but to me a really bad licensed game is a ton of fun. And as I haven't played this one yet, I can't comment. Maybe you can, and drop that down if you've played this game. I'm hoping it's an absolute shambles, because they often make for some of the most fun experiences. Anyway, let's move on, because the next game is It's the Chronicles of Riddick Assault on Dark Athena, and not only that, I believe this one also comes with the Butcher Bay game as well. Now, I have heard that these aren't bad games, so I'm looking forward to a sort of decent Riddick video game experience, and I think that's something we could all use in our lives, because take Pitch Black is one of the finest sci-fi horror films you'll ever sit down to watch. But not having played this, let's move on to the next game, which is Destroy All Humans Path of the Furon. Now, I quite simply picked this one up because I have Destroy All Humans and Destroy All Humans 2, and you can't have, well, at least I can't have one game in a series without wanting them all in the series. So Destroy All Humans Path of the Furon, I don't believe it's the best of the three, but it is another THQ game, so I've got reasonably high hopes for it. But let's move on, because the next game is Anarchy Reigns, which is a game that I won while I was watching it being played on a live stream by Heaps of Games. Now, if you haven't experienced Heaps of Games, then the link will be in the description for his channel too. He's a wonderful content creator and a fantastic live streamer. Just don't tell him I said that. And although it's not normally what I would consider the type of game I would have in my collection, but when you win a game from Heaps of Games, it's something that you have to keep in your collection, and not only that, I'll have to play it because he won't let up until I do. So moving swiftly on, the next game is Borderlands 2, but not just Borderlands 2, it's the Deluxe Vault Hunters Collector's Edition, which is a kind of weird pickup for me because one, I have a love-hate relationship with Borderlands. I want to absolutely love them, but I end up absolutely hating them, well, maybe with the exception of Tiny Tina's Wonderland. But secondly, because it's a collector's edition, and I tend to shy away from them because they tend to be rather on the large side. And yes, seriously, I have measured this using science, and it does take up the space of 8 games. But in this instance, I had no option but to pick it up, because as I said, it is the Deluxe Vault Hunters Collector's Edition, and it comes with an art book and a bobblehead and some decals, but I managed to get this for £1.50 because it was missing the map. Now, as I said, I'm not that fussed about collector's editions anyway, but just to get the game alone for £1.50 was a no-brainer. And having other Borderland games in the collection, despite not liking them quite as much as I think I should, means that I've got to have them all anyway. So sticking with Sony and onto my own home turf of PlayStation 2, I did pick up this, well, let's call it a gem of a game, Let's Make a Soccer Team. And how could I not pick this up? Let's Make a Soccer Team, what is obviously a budget football manager game and published by Sega. Now, I do like a good football management game, and I want to point out, yes, soccer is in the title, so it was maybe aimed at the North American market. But I will point out before Mark, Geordie Slasher Gamer, jumps on the comments and says let's not call it soccer, that football was originally called soccer in England, long before that word was adopted by North Americans. Now back to the game, don't know anything about it, haven't played it yet, but I do like a good football manager game, as I've said, so I'm going to get stuck into this at some point. And with any luck, it will be absolutely hilariously rubbish. So let's move on to the next game, which is Sitting Ducks, and yes, this game I picked up purely because of the box art. Now come on, are you seriously telling me that box art like this doesn't entice you into buying a game? Because if it doesn't, well, you're probably sane, and that means there's more out there for me to collect. Now, I don't know if this is a defect with me personally or if this is a common condition, but goofy ass box art is just something that always drags me straight in regardless of what the game looks like. If you've got some experience with this condition yourself, or if you have some experience with this particular game, then drop that down in the comments because I would love to know. But for now, let's move on to the next game, which is Space Invaders Invasion Day. Now, this was just a pure nostalgia pickup, not because I've ever played Space Invaders Invasion Day, which I haven't, different. But Space Invaders itself, it was the first arcade game that I ever played way back in 1979, 1980, there or thereabouts. So whenever I see Space Invaders referenced to anywhere in a game, then I'm automatically drawn in. And nostalgia is certainly one of the most expensive drugs known to the gaming community, and one that you should always be aware of, despite it causing you to buy Space Invaders Invasion Day and being happy to have it in your collection. Now let's get into the realms where people are actually starting to consider these games retro, and that's PlayStation. PlayStation 1 if you must, but to me just Sony PlayStation. And I did pick up this game, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And yes, we are looking at a licensed TV quiz show tie-in game. And yes, certainly a game that I did own back in the day. But is it a game that you would see me bringing into the collection now? The Forever Collection, the Omega Collection? Well, I would hope not, but I did have ulterior motives for picking up this particular game. Firstly, it was only £2. Secondly, it was in good condition. And hopefully you can see where I'm going here. Yes, I'm really sorry Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but your box is just too good for you and it needs to home a much better game. So yes, obviously I'm going to use the box from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and rehome one of my more desirable games in that particular case. But of course Who Wants to Be a Millionaire will remain in the collection, and it is a part of my gaming history anyway. But enough of donor boxes, and let's move on to the next game, which is Terry Pratchett's Discworld. Now anyone who watched my previous PlayStation 1 pickups will have noticed that I did get Discworld 2 and Discworld Noir, and the very next day after releasing that particular video, Discworld, the first game, came into my local pre-owned game shop and I had to pick it up because I needed all three. Now these are not super pricey, but they're pricey enough to make you wince, especially if you buy all three at the one go. But I do have a great deal of love for Terry Pratchett, not just the games but also the literature, and this game had to come into the collection, no questions asked. So what possibly could follow that next? Well, that is the Atari Anniversary Edition Redux, and that's quite simply again down to nostalgia. One of the first ever home consoles, or first proper home consoles that I ever played on, was the Atari 2600, and anytime I see a collection of old Atari games for modern systems, and yes, the PlayStation 1 is certainly a modern system compared to the 2600, then I just have to pick it up. Granted, not the greatest of games and sometimes not the greatest of collections, but there's that old nostalgia drug pulling you in again, and let's move on to the next game, which is Driver 2 Back on the Streets. Now this is a game that I didn't play much of back in the day when it first came out. The first Driver game, yes, I played that constantly, and mostly that first level where you have to take that silly driving test just to prove that you're a good enough getaway driver. So of course, with Driver already being in the collection, it was only going to be a matter of time before I did pick up Driver 2, although it wasn't one I was in a hurry to get. And of course it's a prime example of when someone like Tiger Chainsaw reaches out to you and asks you to do a little bit for their channel, which is why I really picked up this game. But it is a quality game and it is a fairly important game in the PlayStation library, so having Driver 2 in early is no big shake. So let's move on to the next game, which is Quinson and Little Big Adventure. Now this is a game I believe I rented back in the day when it first came out, and my only memories of it is that I enjoyed it and I can remember pretty much nothing else other than that. I do remember the character and I remember maybe some of the gameplay, but for some reason it's just mainly an itch at the back of my skull, leading me down the path to eventually getting it back into the collection, or into the collection for the very first time. As I said, I believe this was a game I rented back in the day. But here it is, Twinsen and Little Big Adventure, and it's in the collection now, and let's move on to the next game, which is Bomberman, which is an absolute stone cold classic when it comes to couch competition. If you and your buddies didn't play Bomberman back in the 90s, then you don't know what it's like to go head to head with your mates. Now we don't often get the time to play couch competitive games these days, and most games that are competitive are online, but on the rare occasions where I can get a group of people together to play a game, well, this one will definitely go on. That's Bomberman in the collection again, and let's take a look at the next game, which is Tekken, a hugely important game to have in any PlayStation collection. and why it's taken me so long to get it back into the collection is a little bit beyond me. Okay, so there is another reason for picking up this, just wait, bear with me. It was an absolute system seller when the PlayStation came out, yes, maybe not up there with Resident Evil or Final Fantasy VII, but certainly one of those showcase games that said, this is the system that you need to buy. Which leads me on to our next game, which is Ridge Racer, another Stone Cold classic and from Namco, and this was a racing game that you had to have and had to have the ability to play at home. And yes, like Tekken, another ulterior motive. But just bear with me for one more second. And like Tekken, it was a launch window game for the PlayStation. So as you can see from the bottom of the spines, these are games 00005 and games 00001. That's right, there's numbers on PlayStation games. It's a rabbit hole I didn't expect to be facing at any time, but Tootie UK, my good friend Stu, he highlighted this fact and I've not been able to resist since I heard. So thank you very much for that, Tootie. Another rabbit hole. Thank you. Which of course adds another layer of must-have onto Ridge Racer as it does with Tekken. So let's now move on to the next game, which is Theme Hospital, and this is an absolute throwback to my sort of early to mid 90s PC gaming habits. Now I did play this game on both the PC and on the PlayStation, but the PC is probably the best way to play it unless you have the PlayStation mouse. But it is one game that I could heartily recommend anyone to play. Now it might not be your cup of tea to play one of these sim management games, but the level of humour that's in Theme Hospital is something that you must experience. So more than happy to get it back into the PlayStation collection, and let's move on to the next game, which is Final Fantasy VII, arguably the greatest game of all time. Well, certainly up there with Suikoden 2. Now yes, I know you all know that I already have Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation, but if you don't remember, that is a platinum copy because my original Black Label copy, well, that was loaned out to a friend where it went the way that most of those games go, and that is missing. And by the time that I replaced my Final Fantasy VII, it had to be a platinum edition. So this is of course a Black Label coming back into the collection. And I am so happy about that, and I still don't know what I'm going to do with the Platinum one, because obviously the Platinum one has been with me since it was new, so who knows. But of course you know my history with Final Fantasy VII, so I'm not going to bore you with any more Final Fantasy VII talk. I'm sure there's been enough of that already. Now moving on to a system and a game that even I consider retro, and that is the Megadrive, or Genesis if you're unfortunate enough to be American and have that silly name attached to the device. But the game that I picked up for the Megadrive, Jurassic Park. Now I'm not collecting heavily for the Megadrive, and that's simply because I didn't spend a great deal of time with it back in the day. It was more of a side piece gaming machine for me while I was in a transitional period between early 90s PC gaming and then moving on to the PlayStation. But I do like to get some of the games that I had back in the day, and this wasn't one of them. It is however Jurassic Park, which is one of the greatest ever franchises of all time, and although I haven't played Jurassic Park on the Mega Drive, I have played it on the Master System. Now I think there's going to be some differences between those two ports of the game, but no doubt I'm sure I'll enjoy it whatever it brings to me, and that is Jurassic Park coming quite happily into the Mega Drive collection. So there you go my friends, that was my last pickups for 2022. And what did you think? Games ranging all the way from the PlayStation 5 down to the Mega Drive / Genesis, depending on where you're from. And of course I want to know from you if any of these games mean anything to you. Put that down in the comments, because the interaction between you and me, well, that's what makes YouTube special. It certainly does for me anyway. Thank you very much for your time, and until next time, which will still be this year I would imagine, cheerio!